He sat down without warning, right beside a park ranger's SUV that had not moved in days. No one expected what was buried beneath the floorboard. So why did the dog know before anyone else? The full story's right here. But before you hit play, drop your dog's name in the comments and tap subscribe. The morning sun filtered through the Carolina pines, casting long streaks of light across the dirt road that wound through the edge of Raven Hollow Preserve. Dust stirred beneath the tires of Deputy Evan Hart's cruiser as it rolled to a stop just beyond the ranger station. Beside him, Canine Ranger shifted, his dark eyes locked forward, body still as if frozen in mid-thought. The old building stood at the edge of a fire break, surrounded by dense woodland. It was used primarily as a base of operations during fire season or missing persons searches. Today it was quiet, but Evan's call sheet had flagged a perimeter sweep requested by the Department of Wildlife. There had been unusual foot traffic, a few reports of equipment tampering, and one trail camera that had gone dark without explanation. Routine stuff. The kind of morning patrol that offered more boredom than urgency. Still, Evan had learned never to dismiss the subtleties of backcountry cases. The woods had a way of holding secrets longer than any city ever could. He stepped out of the cruiser, the familiar sound of boots crunching against gravel grounding him in the moment. Canine Ranger leapt from the back seat with practiced ease, his sleek black and sable frame moving with purpose. At 5 years old, the German Shepherd was entering his prime, muscled, methodical, and with a nose that missed nothing. The dog trotted a few paces ahead and paused, ears up, chest expanding. Evan watched him closely, noting the way his partner angled his body, not toward the trees as expected, but toward a row of parked vehicles near the ranger compound. 4 SUVs stood in a rough line, their forest green exteriors dull beneath a film of pollen. Government issue, each bearing decals of the Park Service or Wildlife Division. Ranger's nose twitched, then again. His breath slowed. 1 step, then 2, then he stopped cold beside the second vehicle. Not a casual pause, a dead halt. Evan's heart gave a subtle kick. This was not new behavior. Ranger's training dictated that when something was off, something buried, hidden, wrong, he would freeze. Not bark, not paw, not pace, just stop and stay. Evan approached, tension creeping into his shoulders. The SUV was unremarkable at first glance. Mud-caked tires, a dent on the rear bumper. Inside, nothing obviously suspicious, a thermos in the console, map folders on the dash, a radio clip to the passenger visor. The unit number stenciled on the rear matched the logbook entry for a man named Caleb Noren, a senior field ranger due back 2 days prior from a 3-day trail survey. But no return was ever logged. The search for him had not yet been formalized. These things happened occasionally. Rangers got delayed, miscommunications stacked up, but the presence of his vehicle here, dusted but clearly moved recently, raised questions Evan had not come expecting to ask. Ranger remained frozen beside the front passenger door, nose angled downward toward the lower panel. Evan circled to the far side and checked for signs of forced entry. None. The tires were firm, undisturbed. No obvious mud drag, no signs of a crash or sudden stop. He crouched and peered beneath the vehicle, nothing visibly out of place. Then he opened the door. A hot wave of air spilled from the cab, stale and heavy with the scent of pine needles and sweat. The interior was cramped with field gear, a backpack, a rolled sleeping mat, several laminated trail maps folded and stuffed beneath the armrest. On the passenger seat, a brown notebook lay partially open, its pages curled from moisture. Evan reached across and carefully slid it out, setting it on the hood of the SUV. Inside were scribbled notations, trail markers, elevation stats, and brief logs. The last entry was dated 3 days ago and ended mid-sentence. No closing remark, just a jagged line trailing into the lower margin as if the pen had slipped. Ranger shifted again. Not away, closer. His front paws now aligned with the doorframe, his nose pushing inward beneath the seat. Evan leaned down. There was something wedged deep in the footwell, almost hidden behind the floor mat. A small fabric-wrapped bundle, tight and compact. He reached under slowly, fingers brushing the object. It was heavier than expected. Canvas, maybe 6 inches long. Cord-wrapped. Ranger sat back, gaze locked on the package. Evan laid it on the hood. He unwrapped it with methodical care. The outer layer was military-grade cloth, torn from a duffel or jacket by the look of the threading. Inside was a smaller metal box, sealed but dented along one edge. He pressed along the seam until it clicked and gave way. Inside lay a cluster of items, a set of dog tags, a bone-handled folding knife, 2 weathered Polaroids showing what looked like a backcountry shelter and a wide shot of a burn-scarred valley. Folded beneath these was a single sheet of paper, its edges stained with what looked like old water damage. The ink had run in places, but the words were clear enough to chill. It was a checklist, not of supplies or rescue plans, but names. 3 were crossed out. The last was not. Caleb Noren. Evan stared at it, unmoving. He had not anticipated this, not on a routine sweep, not in the silence of a mountain lot. The implications layered themselves fast. A personal list, a ritual of some kind, an obsession, possibly a confession, or a warning. The dog tags bore a name different from the ranger assigned to the SUV. That alone required immediate attention. But the fact that Ranger had zeroed in on the floorboard out of dozens of parked vehicles said something else entirely. Something had clung to this bundle, a scent or residue tied to the deeper instincts only a trained canine could detect. Evan placed a call to the regional office, requesting an incident review team and forensic detail. Then he stepped back, watching as Ranger moved again, not toward the trailhead but the rear cargo section of the vehicle. The dog stood rigid, tail down, one paw raised slightly, still alert. Evan opened the back hatch. The compartment was packed, but not unusually so. Gear crates, fire shelter packs, a rolled tarp, but near the base of the left panel, tucked beneath a collapsed cooler, was another anomaly, a shovel, freshly caked with red clay. That alone might have passed unnoticed given the region's terrain. But next to it was a torn plastic bag marked with an evidence control sticker, partially burned at the edges. No local agency had reported missing evidence, none that Evan knew of. His breath slowed. He scanned the perimeter of the lot. Trees stood motionless in the morning light, their canopies indifferent to what had just surfaced beneath them. He called for the drone team and requested backup. Ranger stood beside him, unmoving. Somewhere out there, something had been buried, perhaps not just in the ground, but in years of silence. Whatever it was, it had drawn a dog to stop dead beside a ranger's SUV in the middle of nowhere, and it was about to change everything. The investigation team arrived just before noon. The sun had burned off the low cloud cover, revealing the full stretch of Raven Hollow Preserve in crisp detail, towering longleaf pines, dry stream beds, and a dirt road that looked too narrow to carry the weight of what had just been uncovered. Deputy Evan Hart stood beside the park ranger's SUV as agents moved in around him. They marked the perimeter, photographed the vehicle, cataloged the contents one by one. K9 Ranger sat several feet away, still facing the SUV's floorboard. It had been nearly an hour since the package was removed, but the dog's posture had not relaxed. His body remained stiff, focused, as if the scent, the memory of it, had left something behind. The bundle retrieved from the floorboard had already been tagged and sealed by the forensic techs, but Evan kept turning it over in his mind. The dog tags that didn't match the ranger, the names on that stained sheet of paper, the burned evidence bag tucked next to the clay-caked shovel. None of it belonged. The ranger assigned to the SUV, Caleb Noren, was still missing. Officially, he was listed as overdue from trail duties, routine monitoring, wildlife notations, fire damage assessment. Nothing tactical, nothing dangerous on paper. But that paper had not included a coded list of names or a soldier's personal items stored beneath the front seat of his assigned vehicle. Evan knew the forest. He knew the way people disappeared out here, some intentionally, some by accident, some not at all. But none of this felt accidental. The forensic techs found trace levels of ammonium nitrate embedded in the torn canvas that wrapped the metal box. Explosive residue, possibly years old, possibly transferred from gear that had once seen combat or demolition work. The signature was faint but real, and Ranger had known. As the drone team began their sweep of the southern woods beyond the ranger station, Evan reviewed the incident logs again. The location wasn't new to him. Years ago, a lightning-sparked fire had scorched nearly 300 acres of nearby forest. It had been declared an ecological loss, but one section, known unofficially as Burn Ridge, was flagged for restricted access shortly after, not because of wildlife, because of something else, something unspoken. A former volunteer named Adam Lyle had vanished 6 years ago while clearing debris in that very section. His truck had been found near the access gate, doors locked, no sign of struggle, no trace of him was ever recovered. His name had been third on the list in the box and crossed out. Evan's jaw tensed as he flipped through Caleb Noren's personnel records. Noren had been present during that fire recovery detail 6 years ago, so had another man named Miller Hayes, whose name also appeared on the list. Both names were crossed out. Evan paused. The first name on the list was William Keene. He tapped into the local employment files and searched the name. Keene had once worked as a state fire investigator in nearby Robeson County. According to archived reports, he died in an off-duty accident involving a propane explosion at his home. But something about that file never sat right. The report was thin, no follow-up, no full coroner findings, a name burned away by circumstance. And now all three names had one thing in common. All were involved in the same incident, the fire at Burn Ridge, all crossed out. Only one name remained unchecked, Caleb Noren, and now he was missing. Evan folded the records and tucked them under his arm. He called Ranger back into the cruiser and drove toward the access gate at the far southern bend of the preserve. The path to Burn Ridge had not been used in years. Overgrown branches scraped the side mirrors, twigs cracked under the tires. The sun filtered through the sparse canopy like broken glass. He reached the locked gate just after 2. The chain had been recently cut, not pulled or weathered, but sliced clean. Evan stepped out, eyes narrowing. He opened the gate and guided the vehicle through, stopping again 100 yards in where the trees thinned into skeletal remains of their former selves, charred trunks and bare patches of earth. The remnants of the wildfire still lingered in the air, faint but constant, an old heat that never fully cooled. Ranger jumped from the vehicle and stood at the edge of the trail, his body coiled tight, nose working the air. Evan scanned the ground. No clear footprints, but the soil was dry and brittle. It wouldn't take much to lose tracks here. Still, Ranger began to pull forward, not in haste, but with absolute certainty. They followed the dog's lead for over a mile, deeper into the heart of the ridge where blackened trees gave way to slow regeneration. New saplings reached cautiously toward the sky. Brambles clung to rocks like memory. Then Ranger stopped. At the edge of a small hollow, a clearing, circular and oddly level, too symmetrical to be natural. In the center stood a pile of stones, low and uneven, like someone had tried to mark something and lost the will halfway through. Ranger stood just outside the circle, body rigid. Evan stepped forward carefully. The stone pile was more than a marker. It had been built with intention. Beneath the top layer, a section of disturbed soil caught the light differently, less compacted, slightly darker. He called it in, then knelt beside the spot. He pushed back the stones, one by one, until the dirt was exposed. Beneath a few inches, plastic sheeting emerged, opaque, wrapped tightly around something firm. He paused. Backup was en route, but the dog had already given his verdict. This was no discarded waste, no ranger's leftover gear. This was a burial. He uncovered the top edge, peeled back the first layer, and froze. Inside was clothing, uniform-grade canvas, Park Service issued. The sleeve still bore the tag. Caleb Noren. Evan stood slowly, breath locked behind his teeth. Ranger moved beside him and sat. Not in alert, not in tension, but in quiet confirmation. A human life ended here, and someone wanted it hidden. The first responders arrived moments later. The scene was secured. The remains were officially identified that evening. Caleb had never left the preserve, and someone had made sure his past came back to find him. When the forensics team ran the dog tags found in the SUV, they were traced to a soldier named Mason Wells, Army Corps of Engineers, MIA since 2012 in Afghanistan, but the tag had no record of ever being in a military evidence system. That meant only one thing: it had never been turned in. Someone had kept it, held it, and stored it beneath their own vehicle seat, next to a list of names all tied to a fire no one wanted to discuss. The items, the plastic, the burn bag, the explosive trace, the silence. It was all unraveling now. Evan looked at Ranger. The dog had sensed something none of them could see, had brought it all to the surface. One by one, the buried stories were rising, and someone else knew it. The coroner's confirmation came just before sunrise. The remains found beneath the stones in the clearing were positively identified as Caleb Noren. Time of death was estimated between 5 to 6 days prior, putting his disappearance nearly 2 full days before anyone even noticed. The official cause was blunt force trauma. No signs of a fall, no animal attack, no accident. Deliberate. Someone had killed a federal ranger in the middle of protected land, buried him beneath rocks, and driven back to the ranger station as if nothing had happened. And for nearly a week, no one knew he was gone, except for one dog. Ranger lay in his crate inside the regional canine unit's temporary command post, eyes half-lidded, body at rest but alert beneath the calm. He had not slept much since the SUV was first flagged. Evan noticed that, how his partner's tension hadn't eased even after the scene was cleared, as if the dog knew the job wasn't done. The pieces were still coming together, slowly, reluctantly. There were no fingerprints on the metal box, but inside it was a key, the kind used for padlocks on outpost sheds along fire zones. Evan matched the cut pattern against known Ranger-issued keys and got a single hit. The key was issued 6 years ago to William Keene, the same man whose name topped the list, the same man who allegedly died in a propane explosion the summer after the Burn Ridge fire. Only now it was clear that report was falsified. The explosion had happened, but Keene hadn't died. He had disappeared, under a new name, new records, buried somewhere deeper than the ground beneath Burn Ridge. And every person on that list, they had been there that day, on the same backburn team. That fire had gone wrong. The official report blamed wind shift, terrain instability, a tragic accident. 3 volunteers had been declared missing, later confirmed dead when no bodies were recovered. But behind the scenes, one report had never been filed. A sealed memo found deep in a hard drive of the county server stated only one sentence: flare deployment failed at Sector 3A. Secondary ignition unconfirmed. One body not accounted for, internal only. No name was ever attached to it, but attached to that report in the digital records was a file never opened, never shared, a photograph. It showed a young soldier, desert fatigues, canine handler. Beside him sat a dark-furred shepherd, tongue out, tail curled beside a boot. The dog wore a tactical vest. The name patch on the handler's chest read, Wells, the same name on the dog tags pulled from Noren's SUV. The soldier had died overseas in 2012. His body was never recovered. The working dog Tago was retired after sustaining injuries in the same incident. His location after decommissioning was never entered into the system, until now. Because in the bottom corner of the photograph, a handwritten note in faded ink read, Sector 3A, Civilian Demo Test, Wells attending. Evan sat back in the command post chair, reading the note again. Civilian Demo Test. That wasn't part of the official wildfire report. That wasn't part of anything. Unless someone had brought back something they shouldn't have. Unless that fire wasn't just wind-blown chaos. Unless it had been staged to erase something or someone. The more he traced the edges of it, the more it made sense. 3 Rangers, a fire, a missing soldier, a body never accounted for. Then, slowly, one by one, the witnesses began dying. Some by accident, some by circumstance, until only Noren was left. And now he was gone too. The list in the metal box wasn't a kill list. it was a record of guilt. Or maybe redemption. Each name crossed out as the truth was buried. Only Norrin hadn't crossed his own out yet. Maybe he was planning to, maybe the box was his to carry, or maybe it was someone else's to find. Ranger stirred in the corner. He rose, padded to the doorway of the post, and stood facing the woods. Still not done. Evan followed him outside. The wind had shifted again, cooler now, coming down through the higher pines. The drone team had flown a final path that morning, capturing thermal readings across the lower ridge. One spot showed residual heat, unusual for the time of year. A shed, far off the main path, registered as inactive. Evan and Ranger hiked out with 2 other deputies. It took nearly 45 minutes to reach the structure, hidden behind overgrowth and erosion channels. The lock on the door had been recently changed, but Evan had the key. It turned with a dry click. Inside, it was dark, musty. The smell of gasoline hung faintly in the air. Tools lined the walls. Broken lanterns, boxes of trail markers, old fire suppression gear. But at the far wall stood something else. A crate, military grade, stamped Dog Gear, Tactical DAR, Retired Unit T091X. Inside were remnants. A harness, a muzzle, a patch that read, "Working, do not pet." Dried blood clung to the edges. A radio collar tagged with the serial number used in forward deployed bases, and beneath it, a photo. The same one Evan had seen. Wells and his dog, Togo. But this one was different. The bottom had a second name scribbled below the photo. Togo, reassigned, Caleb Norrin. Evan stepped back. It had all come together. Norrin had retrieved the dog after Wells went missing, after the blast, after the fire. The handler lost, the dog broken, the truth hidden. Norrin brought him home. And someone wanted that act erased. The crate was all that was left of Togo. And maybe that was why Ranger had stopped cold beside the SUV. Maybe that scent, embedded in the last thing that had touched the dog, still carried the weight of what had been done. A dog trained to detect explosives had led them here, but the real trigger was grief. Justice had taken a long, winding trail through the trees, and a dog had walked it first. When they returned to the station, Evan filed the report. The box was stored. The names sent to Federal Review. The families notified, silent files reopened after years of dust. It didn't bring Norrin back. It didn't save the others. But it spoke the truth. 1 week later, a small ceremony was held beneath the edge of Burn Ridge. A new marker was placed where the stone pile had once sat. A wooden post, simple, clean, etched with the names of the 4 men who had never been properly honored. Wells, Keene, Hayes, Norrin, and below that, a 5th, Togo. No rank, no title, just a date. The day the trail finally ended. Ranger stood beside the post, unmoving. He did not sit. He stood as if still on duty, and maybe he was. Not every hero wears a uniform. Not every story ends in a report. Some live in the unspoken connection between one dog and the silence he refuses to accept. Later that month, Evan received a small package. No return address. Inside was a dog tag, worn, bent, scorched. It read only one word, Ranger. He turned to his partner, who lay resting at the edge of the porch, and understood. The truth was never buried too deep. Not when a dog was still listening. These dogs don't just serve. They save. So hit that like button and subscribe now, because the next story might be even closer to home.